Welcome to our 9 a.m. press conference on new views of the explosive past of Kilauea. We have one speaker, Don Swanson. He's research geologist with the U.S. Geological Hawaiian Volcano Observatory in Hawaii National Park, and he will tell you about Kilauea.
Thanks for coming. Before we start, I'd like to introduce three of my colleagues in the audience who have been close associates and who will be willing to try to answer questions after the session or even during the session if I can't answer them. And if they would stand up as I call their name, Dick Fisk and Tim Rose. They are both from the Smithsonian Institution. We've been working together for almost 20 years. And Bruce Houghton, McDonald Professor at University of Hawaii. We've been working together for 10 or 11 years. I want to go over the handouts briefly with you. The first page is a recently published fact sheet about Kilauea's explosive activity that kind of gives a background for these new findings that we have. The second sheet, labeled Important Points, goes over the important things that I'm going to be talking about today. Then there's a copy of this presentation that I'm going to be giving you today. And then the last folded piece of paper is a copy of the poster about the 1790 tragedy that I'm going to be showing on Thursday. Well, Kilauea, as you know, is always thought to have been a relatively gentle volcano. It does provide hazards for property, and once the lava flow covers land, that's it. But it supposedly has relatively few hazards for people. But what we've learned is that this notion is only partly correct. Our research shows that Kilauea is truly a dangerous explosive volcano over long periods of time, with periods of explosive activity interspersed with periods such as we're in now that are dominated by gentle lava flows. Yes, it's not surprising that we've reached this wrong conclusion in the past that Kilauea is gentle, because since Europeans have been on the island, about 17% of Kilauea has been covered by lava flows. So it's only natural for people to have assumed that Kilauea was a lava flow producing volcano, and that was about it. However, we found from our work, and I'll explain how we did this later, that over the last 2,500 years, which is about as far back in time as we're able to see, Kilauea has been in an explosive mode about 60% of the time. And in a lava flow producing mode such as it's in now, only about 40%. And the diagram at the bottom, the green are the lava flows, the relatively safe periods, the red, the explosive periods, the relatively dangerous periods. So a 60-40 split. This is new and very surprising stuff. Explosive eruptions from Kilauea have been known for some time, but it was thought that they were just little blips interspersed with the overall period of lava flow activity. It was thought, for example, that a period of explosive activity between about 1500 and 1800, we now know it had that 300-year duration. It was thought that was erupted in only a week. And so you can see how people overlooked the explosive events, thinking that they were just something that one could evacuate briefly for and then come back after a period of a few days. Well, what implications does this have? Now, during the periods of time, the 40% of the time that Kilauea is erupting lava flows, that's the time that the volcano is constructed. The lava flows come out and they build up flow on flow. That's how you construct the volcanic edifice itself. These events destroy property. They can kill people if the people are doing relatively foolish things, but they don't have really a severe impact on life. But when the explosive eruptions are occurring, and that's 60% of the last 2,500 years, the volcano is not growing at all, but it is in this very powerfully and dangerous mode. We believe that during this period of time, there is a deep caldera, that is a sunken depression at the summit of the volcano. If you go to Kilauea today, you will see a depression, a caldera that's relatively shallow. But we think that there was a deep caldera, probably more than 600 meters deep, 2,000 feet deep, and so this is very different from the relatively shallow caldera, about 400 feet, that we see today. We think that the caldera was very deep during these periods of time because of the nature of the explosive eruptions that took place during that time. They were mostly, but not entirely, but mostly powered by steam generated by the heating of groundwater and maybe even surface water that from at or below the water table, which today is about 2,000 feet below the caldera rim. So when there was a deep caldera and these episodic explosions, this was a time of greatly increased hazards to people. And this was also a time, I think, that is important in Hawaiian culture. Many of you have probably heard of Pele, the volcano deity, and she reigned from sometime in the 1400s up to the present, and she has a reputation of having a terrible temper. Well, I think this reputation of a terrible temper comes from the 300 years of explosive activity that she reigned over between about 1500 and 1800, throwing out rocks. What do some of us do when we're angry? We throw dishes or pencils or something. She threw rocks during that time. And so this latest period of explosive activity not only would severely impact the population today, but I think has impacted Hawaiian culture. This is a diagram that Larry Maston, a colleague from the Cascades Volcano Observatory, has drawn up, showing one way in which explosive steam-powered eruptions can be generated. Let's see here if I can work this. Here is a lake of lava on the caldera floor. This is the water table. The middle panel shows that the lava lake has dropped down below the water table, so now water can come into the hot conduit, flash to steam, and then emit steam. Now, during this process, the walls of the evacuated conduit are raveling down and presenting a barrier to the steam, so steam can't escape passively, but instead builds up beneath the barrier and then blasts out as steam explosions. Now, this is only one of a whole host of scenarios that one can come up with for the generation of steam-powered explosions, and this is probably relatively a model for a relatively small one. But the point is that we believe that we need to be down to about the water table for there to be much interaction of the groundwater with the hot rocks or with the lava. Now, how did we find all this out? For more than a decade, in fact, for almost 20 years now, we've been studying these two relatively recent periods of explosive activity at Kilauea. And among other things, we've been able to date a lot of the explosive deposits using carbon-14 dating. And what we found is that with more than 100 different C14 ages now, we found that there was a period that lasted for almost 1,200 years, between around 200 BCE or BC and about 1,000 AD or CE, during which there were very few lava flows erupted, but a lot of volcanic ash. And then the younger period lasted for about 300 years, between about 1500 and 1800. This is when Pele, the volcano deity, was there. And these periods, particularly the last period, are defined quite nicely by the C14 ages. We also, during the course of our studies, we determined the ages of lava flows that are older or younger, or in some cases interbedded with the explosive deposits. We got about 45 of these ages, and then we pooled them with as many ages obtained by previous workers as we could. I found 48 of those, so that we could then look at the total range of ages of the lava flows on the volcano, as opposed to the explosive deposits. And what we found is that there were very few lava flows that were erupted during the periods of time represented by the explosive deposits. And this is the only complicated diagram that I'm going to have, and I'll try to walk through it. What we've plotted here are calendar ages from 500 BC up to the present, and on the y-axis are simply the arbitrary numbers that we've assigned to various C14 ages. Each horizontal line represents a different analysis of carbon-14 age made on a lava flow. And the difference between the black lines and the red lines are simply the difference in the source of material. The red ages we've obtained and the black lines were obtained by previous workers. What we find is that the ages of the lava flows fall into distinct periods of time. Here's one here, for example, with only lava flows in it that for the most part predates the start of this explosive period at 200 BC, and then going up to about 1,000, there are very few lava flows erupted during that period of time. There are some, and these are interbedded with the ash, but for the most part, this is a period of time that is represented only by explosive material. Then we have a real surge in lava flows between 1,000 and 1,500, with many different ages, many different lava flows erupted not only, across the entire volcano. Then there's a period of time lasting between 1,500 and 1,800 when we have relatively few lava flow ages. There are some, but very few compared to the period of time before that. And then since that time, this is when the 17% of Kilauea's surface has been covered. There have been very many lava flows during that time. So this is the nature of the data that we use to reach the conclusion that Kilauea has been erupting lava flows only 40% of the time. Now, I want to give now a tragic example of what can happen during an explosive period at Kilauea. And you have a copy of the poster that Bruce and I have prepared that will be shown on Thursday. It's surprising to think about Kilauea as having had the most lethal eruption of all volcanoes in the Cascades, but this is the case. This eruption took place in November of 1790. There's a wide range of ages number of deaths produced by that eruption, and I'm going to give you the range now just to show you how widespread it is, because we don't have any contemporary accounts. The minimum age is about 80 men. The maximum age is 5,405 countrymen. So that's the complete range that you see in the literature. Other ranges are about 400 people and about 800 men. Now we know that accompanying the men were their families. And so all of these accounts that say that so many men were killed, you probably have to double or triple that number for the total number of people who were killed by the eruption. So it looks to us like a few hundred people probably were killed by this eruption. For contrast, the Mount St. Helens eruption in 1980 killed 57 people. Now, as I mentioned, there's no contemporary account, but Sheldon Dibble, a missionary, compiled from interviews with a lot of Hawaiians a description that really matches our findings quite closely. And we think that we've identified the very eruption by its deposit that was responsible for the deaths of so many people. And here's the story briefly. A group of warriors with their families, led by Kilauea, were on their way to do battle with Kamehameha for supremacy of the island. Kilauea was erupting explosively. There were, Pele was angry, in other words. They waited 3 days, the group did. They finally made a run for it. The group split into thirds. The leading group had many fatalities. The middle group was totally annihilated. The following group had few fatalities. The condition of the bodies, as described by Dibble, suggests that they were caught in a surge, a pyroclastic density current, which is a mixture of hot gas and ash that travels at hurricane velocities. The bodies looked to be at rest when survivors came upon them. In fact, people were told Dibble that they had to touch the bodies to make sure that people weren't just sleeping. PDCs, or pyroclastic density currents, move at hurricane speeds, and it was reported that people were clasping onto one another, and I think that's because they were trying to keep from being blown away by these hurricane winds of the surge. The upper slide here shows the surge deposit that we have right in the parking lot to the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory. It doesn't look like much, but you couldn't survive that if you had lasted through that deposit. The lower photograph shows a footprint in muddy ash that was erupted just before this lethal surge was erupted. There are footprints that are too vague to really show up well in photographs that are covered by the surge deposit, and one wonders if those footsteps were the last that a person took when he was trapped by the surge. He or she was trapped by the surge. This is a map showing the location of where we think the fatalities occurred, the 1 being the leading party, 2 the middle party, 3 the upper party. You can see that it's within a kilometer of the museum at the national park, at the Volcano Observatory, right along the main highway that encircles the island, Highway 11. Such an eruption, were it to occur today, would obviously have very severe impact. About 5,000 people a day visit this area in Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. Does this present a threat to communities today? Well, I think the answer is clearly yes. This map shows the image of the summit area. This is the summit caldera here. Those of you who have been here, this is Halemaumau pit crater. This is the area that was covered by one of the surges in 1790. And if you take this area and simply move it to the northeast, say that the eruption was here and the surge moved in that direction, then this surge would engulf communities of Volcano Village and Mauna Loa estates. And if the surge were oriented toward the north, it would get the Gulf Course subdivision. Now, there have been more powerful eruptions than those in 1790, and Dick Fisk in the audience can talk to that, and Tim Rose. About there's an error here. Rather than 800 or 900 years ago, this is about 800 or 900 A.D. There was a very powerful explosion that was able to throw golf ball size rocks 12 miles away. We found a rock that weighed almost 10 pounds 3 miles from the vent. This may have been triggered by the release of carbon dioxide deep within the volcano. Such an explosive eruption might well occur without any warning. We may not even need a caldera for that to happen. And if you want to know more information, talk to Dick and Tim, or perhaps better, go listen to Dick Fisk's talk tomorrow afternoon to hear about this tragic or potentially tragic explosion. So the final point is that the occurrence of explosive eruptions would be bad if they were infrequent. But the major finding that we have is that these are not infrequent events, that they occur for over long periods of time, and as such, the hazard from them is very much greater than we anticipated. The good news is that we're not in one now. We're in a period of lava flow eruption. The bad news is that we don't know when the next period of explosive activity may start. And unfortunately, we can't estimate recurrence interval times because the data are too few, and the length of the explosive periods and of the lava flow periods has been so irregular during the period of time that we can see. And I think that the only recourse to take once Kilauea resumes an explosive mode, which it almost certainly will do, will be to evacuate the entire summit area, all those communities that I pointed out, plus, of course, the national park facilities. So that's the presentation, and I'd certainly be happy to try to answer any questions that you might have.
Hi, I'm Alex Witzy with Science News, and Alex Witzy with Science News. You guys had a paper in GSA Bulletin a couple years ago with this same bottom line that Kilauea is more, dangerous than we had thought. So what's new in what you're presenting here?
The thing that is new is that we now know that these periods of explosive activity lasted for very long periods of time. They weren't just single short-lived events. So now once we get into a period when explosive eruptions start, we think that this period could last for centuries. So in other words, you can't just move away, go to Honolulu for the weekend, metaphorically, and come back and expect to see things calm down. That's not going to be the way that it is.
Hi. Let me ask two questions at once. Do you have any estimate from what I'll refer to as sediments? What I mean is the stuff that's deposited. Do you have any estimate of how many single explosions occurred during those two periods of explosive events? And the other question, I'll throw it now so I don't have to look for the mic again. Can you draw any inferences here for any hazard of explosive events in the Cascade volcanoes? What you learned there, does it refer to, and can you indicate any kind of hazard along the Cascade volcanoes?
Okay, regarding the number of explosive eruptions, during the 300-year period between 1500 and 1800, we think that there were probably scores of eruptions if you define an eruption as being a single burst of material out of the vent. So there would have been scores of times that people who were near the vent would have been in danger. For the earlier period, we know less because it's old and a lot of the record has been obscured. I'm sure that there were frequent explosions, but we really can't be sure of that. Regarding the Cascades, what we've learned at Kilauea doesn't have any direct bearing on the Cascades, but this is a part of a large family of hazards that the Cascades and Kilauea share. and that is that all of those volcanoes can produce explosive events. Now, Kilauea's explosive eruptions are, for the most part, not as large as what might be expected from some cascade volcanoes. And there are hazards from cascade volcanoes such as mud flows or lahars that would travel down river valleys long distances away from the volcano, and we don't have that at Kilauea. The flip side of that, though, is that because Kilauea is thought to be such a gentle volcano, 5,000 people a day come into the area of hazards, whereas most the summits of most cascade volcanoes are reached by only a few people a day. So although the eruptions may be smaller, the risk, in a sense, is no smaller at Kilauea because people are so close to them.
Hi, Josh Fishman from the Chronicle of Higher Education. Question about the 2,000-foot deep summit caldera, which was previously hidden. How did you find it, and what's the evidence that it exists?
This evidence is kind of complicated, but that is the depth to the water table, and we think that the eruptions are triggered at or near the water table. So by inference, this implies that the caldera during the explosive period was at about the water table depth. That is about 2,000 feet down. Now, if you believe the oral traditions, then there's another way that you can approach this. And I do believe the oral traditions. And that approach is that the traditions say that when the caldera formed in about 1500, it formed when a sister of Pele was digging after the body of her lover, whom Pele had killed because Pele thought this guy was her lover. So there was a lover's triangle there. When Pele's sister was digging for the body, she was digging and digging and digging. She was finally warned not to go any deeper because water would come in and put out the fires of Pele. And that tells me that the caldera then had deepened to the point where it was intersecting the water table. People were starting to see the water coming in. And so that would imply then a depth of around 2,000 feet, too.
I have two questions. The first is from Robert Zimmerman, who is from Volcano. And he says, the obvious question is there any way you can improve your ability to predict when the volcano will switch modes to an explosive phase?
Is there any way to predict that? And I think we can't predict it, but I think we will be able to, in most cases, sort of anticipate when that's going to happen, and so evacuations can take place. The way that we would do that is that if indeed the story that I've described is correct and that the caldera has to be 2,000 feet deep, it's only 400 feet deep now, so we will see the caldera dropping. There will be a lot of earthquakes. Visually, we will see it, a lot of rock falls and so forth, and that's the time when the area could be evacuated. Now, this breaks down potentially if we were to have some really large carbon dioxide-driven explosion, such as Dick Fisk and Tim Rose have been working on. And we don't know for sure if those kinds of explosions require having a deep caldera or might come along at any time. And so that is a very important caution in my statement that we should be able to anticipate when these are coming.
Another question from the internet is from Rachel Berkowitz, who's with us today, and she wants to know, why is the lava still flowing between explosive events? Does it just drain the conduit until solidifying by crystallization?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Sorry. Why is the lava still flowing between explosive events? Does it just drain the conduit until solidifying or crystallization?
That's kind of a hard question to answer. You guys want to tackle that question at all?
Could you please state your name and affiliation?
I'm Tim Rose. I'm not not sure I understand the question, actually.
Yeah.
Okay. In that case, I'll ask you another question.
Yeah.
Rachel's asking, with regards to predicting, are there other examples of volcanoes that alternate periods of explosion and fusion, which offer indicative patterns in seismicity or ground deformation?
That is a good question, and I don't know of any such volcanoes, but I rather suspect that there are, but they haven't. The evidence hasn't been uncovered yet. There are many basaltic volcanoes. Kilauea erupts basalt, so I call it a basaltic volcano. There are many such volcanoes in the world, and again, people concentrate on the lava flows. The explosive deposits are usually poorly preserved because they're easily eroded away. They're thin, and so people tend to overlook them. My guess is that if people working at some other volcanoes similar to Kilauea would focus on the explosive deposits and would get a lot of radiocarbon ages like we did for Kilauea, that you might well see a pattern like this develop. Mm-hmm.
Rick Lovett, freelance. What exactly are you radiocarbon dating? Trees or things that have been caught in these?
Yeah, the material that is dated has been exclusively charcoal that is burned by lava flows crossing vegetation or burned by falling hot volcanic ash that can set fire in the forest. Usually volcanic ash doesn't generate fires at other volcanoes, but at Kilauea and other volcanoes that erupt basalt, the ash can, because the lava is very much hotter than at other volcanoes. And so when the ash falls, it's still hot enough to generate charcoal. So, but anyway, in every case that we've determined an age, it is on charcoal from burned vegetation.
Lee Holtz, The Wall Street Journal. I just wonder, perhaps following up on an earlier question, as your understanding of this volcano's historical behavior evolves and gets more sophisticated, how does this feed into local emergency planning, zoning, the kinds of emergency management decisions that both state and local authorities have to make? I mean, what's that relationship, and how is this information playing into that?
Well, I think that this would have a big impact. The emergency managers in the state and on the island should be aware of the fact that once Kilauea resumes its explosive activity, this is going to go on for a long time, based on the past. So any mitigation measures for that kind of activity has to be conceived of in the long term. And so far as I'm concerned, once you get into an explosive period that may last for centuries, and it simply is not prudent for people to be living close to the site of danger. And this is something that emergency managers will be aware of and will take steps accordingly. This is, we hope that this is the way that things work out, at least. And this is very different from the mode now that we have, where it's recognized that a lava flow can move into an area, destroy property, cover land, and then several years later it will be okay. And so, for example, people have been allowed to move back onto lava flows that covered their property 20 years ago, and they're rebuilding. That would not be reasonable for people living near the site of the explosions to do 20 years after an explosion.
And can you indicate, if you have the information, the furthest extent of any of the explosives during the explosive period, and how does that compare with other explosive volcanoes elsewhere in the world? I'm trying to see whether this is relatively modest in extent of damage or death or whatever, as compared with other explosives that we know about. Yeah,
these are very are modest at most. they're even small by comparison to many other explosive eruptions from volcanoes. At Kilauea, we know of deposits that occur 40 kilometers, say 25 miles away from the summit of the volcano. They impacted Hawaiians at the time, but they would not be life-threatening. The hazards that I'm talking about proposed by these eruptions are those that are within the broad summit area where so many people visit. Now, in contrast, you have, well, think of Mount St. Helens in 1980 with the thick ashfall in Yakima and other places in eastern Washington where society was really disrupted by that eruption. That kind of thing would not happen from Kilauea. At least it hasn't happened that we know about.
Thank you. Bruce Houghton, University of Hawaii. There is an alternative perspective on the size of the problem, and that is to consider not the size of the area that's at risk, but the size of the population. And Don raised this before in the context of Kilauea. We've built all over the volcano, and so that puts a substantial number of people at risk. And another aspect of size, just following on from the question from the Wall Street Journal journalist, is it is ultimately a small island, and one of the issues also is the capacity of the island to react to these events. Almost any event would exceed that capacity within that county, and it would become at least a statewide problem.
Are there any other questions?
Related to that, and probably for you, and I'm sorry I missed your name, how many people live within, I mean, we have 5,000 a day who visit, but how many live in those subdivisions that would be at risk if this happened?
Well, I think there are something like 3,000 people that live within the area of the reach of a surge like that in 1790. Something on that order, maybe a little more. And daily, 5,000 people come to the volcano. Not all of those are tourists. Those include people working in the national park too, but that's the number approximately.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Swanson, for a wonderful presentation, and thanks everyone for being here.